Field Vision Sports presents The Matchup with Sasha Bushka.
Kyler Murray kind of looks like a little kid running from his parents when he scrambles in the pocket.
Scott Bushka.
I had to tell my daughter that today wasn't really about her first day of school. It was really about me and the launch of our company.
And Cody Alexander.
Randomly, no. As somebody who's been around football my entire life, I literally can say that I've never smelled smelling salts, nor have I ever seen anybody actually have smelling salts. I'm sure that they were used at some point.
Like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome into the matchup by Field Vision Sports. Excited to have you as always for episode 26. Recording on a Thursday here, heading into the final week of the NFL season. I'm your host, Sasha Bushka, joined by the head of football ops, Cody Alexander, and the Dick Clark of Field Vision Sports, Scott Bushka. Fellas, how we feeling today?
Love it.
Who the hell is Dick Clark?
He basically invented New Year's Eve.
Yes.
And we're starting the new year, so
The old Ryan Seacrest.
it was either him or Ryan Seacrest, Scott. So be glad I went with Dick Clark.
Listen, in addition to the NFL deciding that it was going to play every single game over the last 2 weeks, or every single day over the last 2 weeks, we just talked about the fact that my kids have been off school for almost 2 weeks. So I'm like, I can barely think straight. I don't know when schools decided to take off so long for winter break, but I'm really looking forward to next Monday when we can talk about playoff football and kids will be back in school.
Yeah, it's the nature of Christmas Day and New Year's Day falling on a Wednesday.
Yes.
You can't go 2 days before, you can't go 2 days after, so you just don't go to school ever again.
Yeah, it's the worst when they're in the middle of the week because you have to take the full week off. So it ends up being just the long break.
So here's a real old man get off my lawn question. Did we have this many days off when we were in school? Probably, maybe. I don't know.
2 weeks for sure. Though I do remember back, we didn't start school until Labor Day. Now you start school like second week of August.
Yeah, well, we'll hash that out another time on our NPR podcast. But for today, let's talk about the NFL. We just wrapped up the penultimate week of NFL football, to borrow a turn of phrase from our power ranker Felix Johnson, who we'll bring on in a little bit to discuss the power rankings. But with the week 17 behind us and week 18 ahead, a lot of what we saw in the playoff picture has been pretty much wrapped up, other than a few things. We've got like one seed in the NFC up for grabs, some ordering in the wild card situation in the NFC, and the NFC South up for grabs. And then in the AFC, the 7 seeds up for grabs and the ordering of all the wild cards. And then the AFC North is still up for grabs technically, which would determine whether Pittsburgh's the 3 and Baltimore the 5 or vice versa. So a few things left to hash out, which we'll get into as the show progresses. But I just want to start with this. With all but 1 week of the season behind us, who in your opinion are the few teams that are peaking at the right time right now heading into the playoffs?
I was gonna let Cody go, but
okay.
he looks stumped. So the obvious in the AFC is the Chiefs, but I will go away from the Chiefs and talk about the Ravens. I think the Ravens bye was placed at exactly the right time. That defense has clearly struggled. They had a new defensive coordinator, and you're starting to see them get it together. They looked really good against Houston on Christmas Day, which, as we already discussed, Christmas Day feels like months ago at this point, but it was the last game they played. So it feels like Baltimore's peaking at the right time. And then in the NFC, and I'm sure it would be a mistake for us to not talk about this game ad nauseum because it's really the most, by far and away, the most important game of this weekend. But I'm going to go to the Vikings. Like the Vikings, it was a 2-point win over the Packers. It should have been 15, 16, 20-point win. They dominated that entire game. The Packers came back late. So to me, you got the Ravens peaking in the AFC and the Vikings peaking in the NFC.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to think if there was anybody other than the Ravens that I wanted to hit in the AFC, but I think if you really go and look at just analytically, that defense is now a top 10 defense in almost every metric. And so, though they have struggled this year, especially in the secondary, I think they found a way. Marlon Humphrey is probably going to be the all-pro nickel this year, which I think moving him inside has really allowed Kyle Hamilton to play back. I know a couple weeks ago in an interview, he talked about how in discussions with the staff that it really just made more sense for him to play back. I think they've figured that out. We know the linebacker situation there is good. And then now, I mean, look back. One of the things last year I think that was really impressed a lot of people with the Ravens was Mike McDonald was able to get a ton of production from that front. They're now the second best in pass rush production. They're the second best in sacks behind Denver. And I think a name that doesn't get mentioned enough is Chuck Smith, who is the pass rush specialist for the Ravens, is actually a former Ravens player. There was no drop off. I think at the beginning of the year, people were a little bit worried. The run defense was there, but the pass rush and the secondary wasn't together. Now, fast forward, they're a top 10 defense. They're an elite pass rushing defense without really a named player. So I think for me, it's got to be the Ravens in that. I think if you go and you look, a team to keep an eye on that I don't think anybody wants to play is the Buccaneers. For whatever reason, they've gotten that defense figured out. I think a lot of it has to do with the front is starting to play. They figured out the linebacker position, which was killing them in the middle part of the year and the beginning of the year. The secondary is playing really, really well right now. And then they have a run game. I don't think anybody's ever said that they can't pass the ball, but now they can run. So to me, it's got to be the Buccaneers look like they're peaking at the right time, and then the Ravens on the other side in the AFC.
I'll bring up one team in each conference that we didn't talk about there just to kind of get the pulse check on them. I'll start with the Buffalo Bills because you both brought up the Ravens, and I think the Bills are kind of out of sight, out of mind right now. Like they got that big win over the Lions, but then they end the year with 3 divisional games against the bottom dwellers of the division. They played the Patriots last week, beat up on the Jets, and now they'll play the Patriots again. But the last time we saw the Bills play what you would call a meaningful game, or they're all meaningful, but like meaningful in terms of you think there's actually a chance they might lose. The offense looked really good. The defense not as good. Do you think the Bills will have a chance to get their defense together before the playoffs? And do you see them as going in the right direction or just kind of in neutral right now?
I think with the Bills, the one thing that if of all the contenders that we look at, they're the one defense that's below league average in EPA per dropback. And that should be a cause for concern. We know that the corners are good. The safeties have been a question mark the entire year. That's one of the things, if you talk to people around the Bills, they're scared to death right now of their secondary. If the pass rush is there, I think they're fine, but they've had so many different little nicks and bruises with the corners and then the front, and then the linebacker situation there has kind of been a disaster at times. So I would push pause. I think the offense is doing its job, but I think if you look at it, the Lions and the Bills are essentially mirrors of each other. The offenses are just unbelievable, but defensively, they may have to get in shootouts, which I don't think necessarily is a recipe for winning a Super Bowl or even going to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and the Lions was the other team I was going to bring up on the other side because they the offense has looked just as good as it has all year. It's been firing on all cylinders, but about halfway through the year, they just reached like a point of critical mass on the defensive injuries.
Mm-hmm.
And any game that they haven't played the Bears out of the last 5, they've basically been in a shootout, losing the one to the Bills, winning the one against the Niners and the Packers, I believe. And so the question is like the Lions were everybody's Super Bowl favorite by far. I think the Chiefs have now passed them in the odds in terms of favorite to win the Super Bowl. Do you still see the Lions as at least the top contender out of the NFC, or has somebody surpassed them in that regard?
I'll let you go, Scott.
I mean, I would. For me with the Lions, I think that home field advantage matters a lot.
Mhm.
And that it's part of why we'll get into it. It's part of why I think I like them in the game against Minnesota on Sunday night, because I think they're going to be a desperate team. The reason I think that home field advantage matters a lot is I think home field more so than on the offensive side, home field can help a defense in terms of energy, in terms of noise, just in terms of like getting some variance and getting some of those high variance plays. And I think the Lions defense needs that because they are banged up. Like they're going to rely on some big plays, blitzes, getting some sacks, right? Getting some interceptions. You saw it against San Francisco. Kirby Joseph came through with 2 big picks. So I still think they're contenders. To me, and I was going to bring this team up, the team that we're not talking about, and I'll tell you just personally, I can't get my finger on right now, is the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, I was going to mention them.
And in theory, I think everyone likes them as one of the best teams, if not the favorite, to come out of the NFC. But they have so much noise surrounding them because everyone thinks Sirianni's kind of a dumbass. You've got the beef between Hurts and AJ Brown, but like you've got Saquon Barkley chasing the Eric Dickerson record. But I think people just don't know what to do with them. But the reality is they have a really good defense, a really good run game, and they have maybe the best receiving core in the league. So, I mean, I don't know. Detroit and Philly plays each other. Like, who are you taking?
Yeah, I'm with you, Scott. Like the Eagles to me are a team defensively that is just, it's like almost like an avalanche. Like their defense is just so much better right now than it was even a month, 2 months, 3 months ago. You know, we do that. Jackson, our data guy, does that chart, and it's just like it's like a mountain peak, man. I think you talk about exponential growth through a season. That's where Fangio is right now with the Eagles. That's a defense that people just don't want to see. Now, the offense, I think you mentioned the offense, a little bit of a pause, but they're so different in the NFL landscape. They play 10 personnel and 4 open at a lot of times. They play in space. They really make you space out. And then you add the fact that you have Saquon and Hurts who can kind of run a little bit. You're really putting teams in a bind, and teams don't really know how to play that. That's why Saquon has just been able to go off. It's essentially what we all want we want the Ravens offense to look like. I think that's what the Eagles do. I mean, imagine putting Lamar in that backfield with that kind of a spread scheme. I mean, geez, just all that space. But I agree with you. If it wasn't for Sirianni, if it was Vic Fangio as the head coach, I think they're probably the Super Bowl favorites. But it's not. It's Sirianni, and so then you're like, okay, well, do we trust him? Because there's going to be a game where it's going to come down to a game management or a timeout, or the head coach just needing to call a timeout to get everybody back together. And then it's like, is he the guy? And I just don't think people believe that.
Yeah. If you imagine that game, Detroit versus Philadelphia, there's no way that Philadelphia, if they wanted to, couldn't control the clock, right? Run the ball on Detroit's defense, get AJ Brown one-on-one on the outside, like hitting slants for first downs and or big plays. And then you flip on the other side of the ball, like Detroit can move the ball against anyone, but like there's probably not a better defense that's positioned to at least slow them down. Like I don't know.
Fangio knows golf. I mean, it's kind of, we were having this conversation before about are the Chiefs worried if they see the Bengals in the playoffs, right? Because of Lou Anarumo. Well, it's like kind of like Fangio knows golf. Fangio knows how to get to golf, and especially with that defense, it just compresses everything. It loads the intermediate of the field, and even to your point, what the Eagles do is not conducive to man coverage, which is exactly what the Lions want to run. You're going to get spread out. You're going to get isolation. And AJ Brown is probably, outside of Justin Jefferson, has to be the next best receiver in the NFL. So you're looking not somebody you want to get in a one-on-one regardless. And where are the Lions' strength? It's at safety with Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch. and that's in the middle of the field, and they completely eliminate them from that by spreading everybody out.
Yeah, the Sirianni question is interesting because for as much as hate as he gets, like his record as a head coach is impeccable, and
Right.
it's one of those things you have to ask yourself: is he just crazy, or is he crazy like a fox? Like, how much of stuff he does is it calculated, or did he just land the perfect job where like Howie Roseman puts a great team on the field and they have great talent and anyone's going to win as the head coach?
I would do that. I think there's one-offs. I think like to stick with the Eagles, like a Doug Peterson is a great example of like you just have this one-off and you get hit lightning and you go on it, but you are what you repeatedly do and they win consistently. It's kind of like the same thing, you know, me living in Dallas, I hear it all the time about Mike McCarthy. Like they win 10 plus games every year. Like, yeah, they don't win the Super Bowl, but it's like, so is Mike McCarthy actually not a good coach? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think with Sirianni at some point it will take a Super Bowl. It's going to come down to, you know, people just won't believe until he wins one.
Yeah. I think the reason, and I'm as my kids are like destroying stuff in my house behind me. I think the reason people go there is the reality of the fact is in the playoffs, the effect of the head coach and the effect of the quarterback are magnified, right? Because we know all these games are pick 'em games. They're all coin flip games, right? And it's the reason why the Chiefs have been so, I don't want to say unbeatable in the postseason, but the reason they've been so successful is they've got a top 3 coach and a top 3 quarterback, period. And those two guys have won a bunch of close games together. And I think when you get to the Eagles, people don't trust Sirianni and they don't really trust Jalen Hurts, right?
I agree.
So you put those two together. The Super Bowl run, good run. The 49ers also played without a quarterback in the NFC Championship game, right? And so I think Sirianni's had 2 years at this. The Sirianni Hurts combo has really had 2 years of shots at this. One, they went to the Super Bowl, but the other one they flamed out really pretty bad. So I think this is the year where people are going to say I told you so either way.
Yeah. No, I agree.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. We've hit on most of the top contenders on both sides. Let's add our good friend Felix Johnson to the stage now, our resident power ranker, and go through the second to last version of the power rankings and probably the last in this form, as we'll do something different going into the playoffs. First of all, Felix, how are we feeling today?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
You always bring so much energy to the podcast.
Yes,
That's what I
love it.
appreciate.
I don't know what you guys want from me.
Pumping me up.
Like, I mean, I'm here for 10 minutes and then I leave. Like, what do you
You
want?
make me want to run through a wall, Felix.
Well,
That's
Felix, we want some energy. You got to be remember in the remember in the words of Chris Collinsworth, you got to yell at the microphone.
Well,
We need you yelling at the microphone.
Sasha knows what it's like to listen to me yell into a microphone for about 2 hours a day for 2 years. So I don't think you want that.
okay. Thanks for bringing it, Felix. Honorable mentions this week in the power rankings: the Miami Dolphins, the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Denver Broncos. I don't know about the Dolphins, but I guess if they're close to making the playoffs, so they earn their honorable mention spot. Number 10, the Los Angeles Chargers. Number 9, the Green Bay Packers, down from 7. The Rams stay at 8 this week. The Commanders moved from 9 up to 7 with their victory over the Falcons. The Eagles moved from 5 down to 6 because they didn't beat the Cowboys by enough, I guess.
Yeah, I guess.
Although I get it because the Ravens move from 6 to 5. The last time they played was Christmas Day, and they embarrassed the Houston Texans. The Vikings stay at 4. The Detroit Lions at 3. Obviously, those two teams will square off on Sunday night, both 14-2. The Buffalo Bills, who we talked about a little bit, at their 13-3 mark, stay at 2. And the Chiefs, who also haven't played since Christmas Day, stay at number 1 with the 15-1 record heading into the playoffs, and now are officially the Super Bowl favorites yet again. First of all, Felix, do you like your rankings?
No, I hate them. I think they're great. They're fantastic. They're the best rankings in the world, CBS included. I don't know.
Scott, do you like Felix's rankings?
I don't think Scott likes my rankings.
I'd like to go first. Felix, last week I probably made a mistake, and I told you I loved your rankings and that they were perfect. And the reason I thought they were perfect is I think we all believe there are really 7 teams that can win the Super Bowl. There's 7 real contenders, and you had those teams 1 through 7 in a pretty logical order. I have a big issue with your rankings this week, and it's because you shook those 7 up, and I'm not quite sure why. And my specific beef is around Green Bay. Apparently, the Rams, who should have lost to a team that has nothing to play for in Arizona, and the Commanders, who should have lost to an Atlanta team, were so impressive that they moved above the Green Bay Packers, who you moved down from 7 to 9. But I just don't. My issue is that there's still only 7 teams that can win the Super Bowl. In the AFC, it's the Chiefs, the Bills, and the Ravens. In the NFC, it's the Lions, Vikings, Eagles, and still Packers, I would argue. Did the Packers get beat by 2 in Minnesota? Yes. But it was only 2, and I still think the potential is there. So I just don't get moving the Rams and the Commanders, who weren't that impressive in their own right, above the Packers on this list.
It was less about them being massively impressive and the Packers. I think the Packers, I think they're so good, but I think you answered your own question in that the Falcons should have lost to the Commanders. They didn't. The Rams should have lost, but they didn't. The Packers have lost to all of those teams that you have included them in the list with of teams that can win the Super Bowl. They've lost to the Vikings now twice. They've lost to the Lions. They've lost to the Eagles. Sure, it was week 1, but they're going to have to beat those teams to get to and win a Super Bowl or the NFC Championship or whatever it is. And we just haven't seen them beat those teams yet. And that's all I see from them. And I know power rankings are a little fickle sometimes, and they're probably not better or worse than the Rams or the Falcons, but they did lose this past week, and those other teams didn't.
Yeah. The question is, do you think, because we might see this, like Packers-Rams wild card weekend, who do you think's winning that game?
If you gave me a line, it'd be very interesting to see, because I'm not interested. I'm not exactly sure which way it would go, just being that I like McVay in the coaching matchup. Jordan Love can be a little inconsistent with the turnovers and everything. This is still a young team, and I know the Rams aren't the best team in the world. They're probably not going to make it out of the first round, but depending on what that game looks like, I'm not 100% on what the Packers are capable of.
Yeah, for what it's worth, because Scott keeps bringing up the 7 teams that have a chance to win the Super Bowl, and putting the Packers in there. The Super Bowl odds, the current Super Bowl odds are out, and as I mentioned, the Chiefs are the favorites at plus 360. The steep drop off is really after 6, though, and it's before the Packers. It's the Lions plus 470, Bills plus 600, Ravens plus 650, Eagles plus 700, and the Vikings plus 800. And then the Packers are plus 1,400. Although there's another steep drop off after the Packers to the Bucks at plus 2,500. And then there's a bunch of teams at plus 3,500, the Rams being one of them. So Vegas agrees with Scott that the Packers are the 7th team there, but they do kind of draw a line between the other 6 and the Packers.
Mm-hmm. And Frank, I mean, it's just the Packers. They might be just as good as the Vikings, but they haven't beaten the Vikings. They might be just as good as the Lions or the Eagles, but they didn't beat them this year. And then they had plenty of opportunities to do that. And even at their best, they couldn't beat the Lions.
Yeah. Sasha, that's a helpful data point, if you're asking Vegas, it's really 6. There's a 7th fringe candidate, but I think it's interesting that Vegas would put the Bucks as the 8th team. Not that anyone's really giving them a real shot to win. But that probably has more to do with them having a home playoff game. Although I guess the Rams will too.
And just actually the Rams, Commanders, Chargers are your plus 35s, plus 3,500. So that the Vegas has them as the 9th, 10th, and 11th best teams, which out of the top 10, Felix has 9 of them in his power ranking. So he's pretty close on where Vegas is. The Bucks are the team that's not in, I believe.
I forgot they existed. I'm sorry.
You forgot the Bucks. Yeah, like you didn't even put them in the
It's easy to
honorable
forget
mentions.
about them.
Felix always forgets one team. That's the one thing you can count on with the
If you're
power.
gonna forget the NFC South. But I mean, that's just kind of if you're gonna forget a team, forget whoever's in the NFC South. That's
To be fair,
typically-
Can we just relegate both South divisions
The
to like
interesting,
somewhere in between college football and professional football?
the interesting thing about mentioning those 11 teams and the Bucks being 8th slotted in the Vegas rank, they're the only team out of those 11 that hasn't already secured a playoff spot.
right.
The Bucks are technically not in the playoffs, which means, I mean, they're 13.5-point favorites this weekend. They win, they're in. But once they win, their odds should probably creep up just a little bit higher, even.
Mhm.
What's sorry, I know I'd love to hear Cody's beef with the power rankings too, but
Doesn't have any.
what is interesting is that, I mean, I don't think people are giving Houston enough credit for how much they've underperformed expectations. Because,
Offensively, yes.
well, just at the start of this year, Houston was on everyone's list to to challenge the Chiefs for the AFC crown, and now we're talking about Super Bowl title odds, and we're talking about the top 10 of our power rankings, and no one even feels like Houston is worth even mentioning in any of it.
Yeah. For what it's worth, they're tied with the Broncos at plus 6,000, just behind the Steelers at plus 5,000. So that puts them tied for 12th in the Super Bowl odds, or tied for 13th, actually. Just ahead of a bunch of teams that won't make the playoffs, the Bengals, the Dolphins, and the Falcons.
Well, and they'll probably have to host Baltimore week 1 or whoever the best non-division winner in the AFC. So tough first round for Houston.
Yeah, the 4 spot on both sides is you don't want to be the 4th place division winner this year because there's going to be good 5 seeds on both sides, but especially in the NFC. So, Cody, did you have any beefs that you wanted to bring up to Felix here?
I'll actually side with Felix on the Packers, and it's the whole argument is located on the defense. So the defense is actually one of the better defenses in the NFL. The problem is the only saving grace that they've had at the corner spot, Jair Alexander, is done for the year. Mm-hmm. So you've already you've taken a situation that is really bad and you've made it completely worse. This is a team that I don't think can beat the big boys. So it makes sense to me that you put the Buccaneers ahead of them. Vegas does anyway. I'm okay with the Packers being 9 after essentially proving that they can't beat the Lions, they can't beat the Vikings. Now we're looking at kind of they're either super young in spots, they've had to move guys around into different spots. I mean, their nickels played outside corner essentially the entire time this year. They don't really have an answer. I can tell you right now in Green Bay, that's a big worry. So I'm okay with them being number 9. I would just, my beef is really with, I think that the Rams and the Commanders probably need to be flipped. I think the Rams offense is better than the Washington offense. Both defenses are not very good, so I'm fine with them being down here. I do also think, too, the Eagles are a dangerous team. And again, we just went through ad nauseum, right, about Nick Sirianni. We went on for about 5-10 minutes. But I think, again, we're kind of biased towards, okay, well, Baltimore looks for real. Let's put them up. Where in reality, the Eagles probably need to be higher than we even have them. I mean, if you look at it, all the metrics, the Eagles have surpassed the Broncos and the Vikings as the number 1 defense in the NFL right now. So I think that's a team too that people don't want to necessarily play. Everything else I'm fine with. I just think the Eagles should probably be 4. Put the Vikings down, put the Ravens down, and then I would just switch the Rams and the Commanders. That would be the only thing, just small tweaks.
A few little tweaks. Pretty good, Felix.
I think particularly with the Eagles, it's kind of a conversation that some people have with the Vikings. It's like, when is Sam Darnold going to kind of look like Sam Darnold? And I think with the Eagles, when are they going to kind of return to being the Eagle? Like, when is Nick Sirianni going to screw up a game for them? And like now it's the playoffs, and it might be in the first round. Obviously, they're good enough to go to and win the Super Bowl, so I'm not saying that might happen. But this is a team that has been winning virtually all year long. They might gas themselves out just a little bit. Now, Jalen Hurts coming off the injury too, and Kenny Pickett coming in. We'll see what they are in the playoffs. I just don't know how much gas they have left in the tank, and they're locked into the 2 seed, and so they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. And who knows, depending on who ends up with the 1 seed, they might end up hosting the NFC Championship. So Philadelphia is very dangerous. I just think they're going to gas themselves out a little.
Well, to your point with that, whoever wins the Lions-Vikings game, you don't necessarily get the prize.
Exactly.
Because you're going to have to play that team again.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Eagles are probably better off being in that number 2 seed, knowing that, hey, whoever probably loses that game, we'll see it again, and they might win. And so therefore will then be the de facto home field advantage. So yeah, the NFC is kind of a mess. Like, do you want to win? Do you not?
Yeah. If you're the 2 seed in the NFC, you start with the 7 seed. And then in the second round, unless all 3 wildcard teams win, you're probably getting the NFC South winner or the NFC West winner in the second round, which is probably better than playing any of the wildcard teams. So
but even then, if you're Detroit, you played the Rams in the playoffs last year, and in the first week of this year, it was close. You're going up against McVay. You've got a lot, like the Rams being a division winner but not being that great is still kind of like I think they're just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, being that they're already in the playoffs than Cincinnati, because they have that Super Bowl pedigree and prestige, because they're already there and they're going to host a playoff game too.
Yeah, the reality is, though, there's not an easy path in the NFC because all 3 wild cards are capable of winning their first round game.
Yep.
Yeah, the NFC is, to me, a much more balanced conference than the AFC, which feels pretty top heavy at this point. But I think we make this mistake every year, which is we assume that whoever wins that game, the Vikings or the Vikings or the Lions, is going to have to turn around and play that team 2 weeks from now. What I would argue is like the Commanders and the Packers are going to be a formidable 6-7. Like one of those 2 teams can win, right? And then the Eagles are going to be sitting there having to play either the Lions or the Vikings in the second round if those teams win. If the Eagles win, which the Eagles might not win. So I mean, the beauty of the NFL playoffs is we don't really know what's going to happen. So I would argue, like, ever since the NFL has gone to the 14 team field, like the one team that gets that bye, it's a huge advantage because it's a week of rest and it's just one less game. Instead of having to win 3 games, you got to win 2 to get to the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, it's like a 50% better chance of making it to the Super Bowl if you're just looking at how many games you have to win versus other opponents. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, but no doubt that Vikings-Lions game is huge. And if the Vikings go out and win that game, those odds might flip between the Lions at plus 470 and the Vikings at plus 800. Or if the Lions win, they might end up being closer to like co-favorites with the Chiefs right now. I think it's a little wait and see from Vegas to see who gets that 1 seed. And then whoever does will kind of jump up as the favorite in the NFC.
Yeah.
Can I ask you guys a question real quick? I think, and I wrote an article about this on Arrowhead Addict, and I don't know if it's come out yet. It might have since when we've had this conversation. But if you and Sasha, we've had this conversation before where, like, I believe that 8 out of the next 10 Super Bowls, I said this a while back, they'll be won by AFC teams because of the quarterback. And right now, even if the Eagles play the Bills in the Super Bowl or the Vikings play the Ravens in the Super Bowl, or whatever the case may be, I feel like a lot of people are still going to pick the AFC team, despite that NFC team being ridiculous because of and a lot of it has to do because of what we've seen from Patrick Mahomes. But would you guys subscribe to that notion of, like, yeah, sure, the NFC team is probably better, like the Lions, Vikings, Eagles, but it comes down to the quarterback in the Super Bowl?
I'll answer first because I think you know my answer, and then I'll let Scott and Cody go because we've had this conversation a bunch of times since the first time you said it, And what I always say is like, even if one conference is markedly better than the other, which right now isn't actually the case. When you first said this a couple of years ago, the AFC looked a lot tougher than the NFC. And I get the quarterback argument because there are more top tier quarterbacks in the AFC than the NFC. But the reality is like one team gets represented in the Super Bowl from each conference each year. And so it's about 50-50 which one's going to win, because it's not like it's not like all the AFC teams are going to play all the NFC teams. It's 1-1. And even though the Chiefs have won the last 2 Super Bowls, the NFC team was favored both times.
Right.
So I don't agree with that take. Unless you just make the argument that like Patrick Mahomes is so good, he's just going to keep winning Super Bowls, and then
it's not just him though. Like if Josh Allen goes to the Super Bowl, like I mean, I think a decent amount of us would believe that he can do some of the things we've seen Patrick Mahomes do, or at least a version of them, and come out with wins just like Patrick Mahomes has. We just haven't seen him in the Super Bowl yet.
I do. I think it's a really interesting question, and I do think it's almost as if there are structural differences between the two leagues and how teams have built themselves, right? Like, and when I say structural differences, like in baseball, it used to be that the National League didn't have a DH, in the American League did, but you've got a bunch of AFC teams who are dominant quarterback heavy, right? All the best quarterbacks live in the AFC. And by the way, they're all about the same age. And I would attribute that to like Tom Brady and Bill Belichick in the arms race of everyone in the AFC feeling like if we're going to beat them, we have to get our franchise guy. And the NFC is almost all system based, right? You've got like people who have question marks at quarterback: Sam Darnold, Jared Goff, Jalen Hurts. Like almost all,
it's a lot of retreads too. Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, like guys who didn't succeed at their first places.
Brock Purdy.
Right. Exactly. Brock Purdy. Right. So almost all those teams, if you look at it from a DVOA standpoint, look like more complete teams. Right. And quite frankly, like they have their salary cap spread out more evenly across their 53 guys. But last 5 years, Super Bowls, 3 have been the Chiefs. The NFC won the other 2. Who are the quarterbacks of those teams?
Matthew Stafford and
Tom Brady, elite guys.
Tom Brady.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you still haven't had a team in the last 5 years win a Super Bowl without an elite quarterback.
Well, and even if you look at the grand scheme of NFL history, like you got Terry Bradshaw and like the Manning brothers, the Tom Brady, it's mostly elite quarterbacks winning Super Bowls. Even if better team, like they might be on the better team too, like Montana was and Terry Bradshaw was, but also it's still elite quarterbacks winning Super Bowls.
Yeah. And then you have Nick Foles.
And Nick Foles and Brad Johnson and Trent Dilfer. Like
Nick Foles and Doug Peterson were the last ones to do it.
Well, and I think that 2017 will go down as a year where they were early. I think with their RPO style offense, we see what happened in 2018 when essentially football broke, and then 2019 everybody decides, hey, let's just play man to stop all these RPOs, and then we get the zone centric style that we have now in 2020. So I think that year will go down as kind of like they were early, and they kind of had some technology that was way ahead of everybody else, right? No, they were playing with some different rules, and so I think that year will go down. I will say this, like to your point, Scott, if there is one team in the NFC that we feel like if you have an elite quarterback when he's healthy, it's got to be the Rams. And so if there's one team that's just going to get hot and could end up winning the Super Bowl over an AFC team, you've got to argue that it's probably the Rams. And there's probably nobody else. Because even with Jared Goff, you can scheme Jared Goff into being an average quarterback. I don't think anybody's saying Hurts is a elite quarterback. Nobody's going to take Baker as an elite quarterback. Sam Darnold is, there's your system guy that you were talking about. I think Jaden Daniels is early. I think if we're having this conversation in 3 years, maybe he's an elite quarterback. Jordan Love is yet to prove that he's elite. And so when you look at it NFC wise, they just don't have the elite pedigree at quarterback. They probably have a good mix, right? Of, hey, we have a good defense and we have a good offense, like the Eagles, for instance. But to your point, you have to have an elite quarterback to win anymore. And if you're going to pick somebody off of that, it's going to be the Rams.
Yeah. And I'll even say, and I wrote this in the article, and I'll let you guys know when it comes out, but even the bad teams in the AFC are the worst teams in the league. So that's why Houston got CJ Stroud. That's why Indianapolis, we'll see with Anthony Richardson, but they drafted him. The NFC is finally getting guys like Jaden, like maybe Caleb. We'll see. And like Bo Nix and JJ McCarthy finally going to the NFC. So even the worst teams in the league, we're getting the best picks at quarterbacks over the last handful of years.
Yeah. Well, the thing, there's a difference between having an elite quarterback and getting great quarterback play. You still have to get great quarterback play to win. And just the perfect example is like Patrick Mahomes didn't make the Pro Bowl this year. It just came out. Sam Darnold and Jared Goff did. And Baker Mayfield did. All three of them did. And so they actually played better than Patrick Mahomes this year, but they're still not elite quarterbacks, and Patrick Mahomes is, if it comes down to that in a Super Bowl matchup.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, even going further than that, the Jets, I think any team in the NFL would take the Jets and the Browns roster on almost any given year the past couple of years. But because they've had just abysmal quarterback play, they're bottom basement teams.
Especially going up against all those quarterbacks in the AFC.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Not to, I know you're trying to move on, Sasha, but not to relitigate the history of football, but like Cody, when you talk about that Eagles team and saying they were like, you're saying they were early to what I'll call like the innovative offense movement.
Mm-hmm.
What I would say is Doug Peterson was the coach of that team, right? Doug Peterson came from the Chiefs as the offensive coordinator, and Andy Reid and the Chiefs were actually doing a lot of that stuff before 2017. The problem is they had Alex Smith, right? And they hit a ceiling, and then they said, we're going to move on from Alex Smith, give us an elite quarterback to pair with an innovative offense, and like, boom, it's off to the races, right?
Yep.
And so you like, what we're setting up is like a pick 'em, right? Like either give me an elite quarterback or give me an innovative offense with like, you know, Ben Johnson and KOC and Sean McVay. The reality is like the real power comes when you have an innovative offense with an elite quarterback, which is why the Chiefs have been so successful. So the question is like, who else has the ability to do that?
Well, and then the seasoning for that is the defense. Is then who has a top 10 defense. And I think that would be the only thing, you know, that's kind of where I think the Chiefs really double down, and that's why they're so elite. That's what gives me pause about the Bills. Baltimore is kind of fringe top 10. Do we believe them? You know, they got hot late. What does that mean? You know, the Texans, you could argue, have a top defense. With Jalen Petrie, though, gone, I just don't see that working. He's kind of the fulcrum of that defense at that nickel spot. Steelers are okay. Chargers are okay. Denver has that, but they don't have the elite quarterback, right? So, you know, it's like there's a major flaw in almost everybody in the AFC other than the Chiefs. They have the elite quarterback. They have the elite coach. They have an elite defense. Whereas in the NFC, the Detroit has that, that mix that you're talking about, but we've also said they're fading fast on defense. You know, the Eagles to me would be the one that you kind of have to say, okay, they have a relatively good offense, maybe elite offense with that, but we don't trust the head coach. We don't trust. So it's just like really, it's kind of interesting. If the Chiefs don't three-peat, I think it's a super, super disappointment for Kansas City because everything this year is set up for them with the formula to win.
Yeah, the Chiefs, one of the things you have to look at too is like if you're living on scheme and your quarterback's not completely elite, you have to allocate a lot of resources on the offensive side 100%. Of the ball. And the Chiefs made a decision when they traded Tyreek Hill that like, yeah, we can have the best offense ever and like a mediocre defense and hope to win, or we can just build our defense, get it really good, and then Patrick Mahomes is going to figure it out on offense well enough. They allocate almost no resources to the skill positions outside of Travis Kelce in terms of salary cap space, and tight ends are cheaper than wide receivers anyways. And so, yeah, he's one of the highest paid tight ends in the league, but they don't spend any money on receiver. They're starting to spend money on the offensive line, and then they just put the rest of their draft picks and salary cap into the defense over the last several years, and it's created a balanced attack.
100%.
Check.
Let's that turned into a longer conversation. Felix really gave us a whamboozler of a question there. But let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll start looking at Week 18 games and give you a few picks to close out the pod. You're listening to the Matchup by Field Vision Sports. Stay with us. Welcome back into the Matchup by Field Vision Sports. Excited to be with you. Just got done going over the power rankings, talking a little big picture roster construction of AFC and NFC teams. Let's take a look ahead now at Week 18. There's one matchup that stands out above the rest. Two of the teams that have played better than anyone all season long. As a matter of fact, they have the second two best records in the league, both 14-2 at this point. Minnesota and Detroit will play on Sunday night for the right to have the 1 seed and get a bye, or to be the 5 seed and travel to either the Bucks or the Falcons in the first game of the playoffs. How do you see what do you see as some keys to this matchup, Cody?
Yeah, to me, it's going to be in the very first matchup. I really felt like the Vikings got caught, right? That they essentially, the Lions had a plan for everything. Every counter punch that they had, it felt like Ben Johnson was ahead of them. And so I really think it spurred, especially with the Vikings, because you've seen it since that game, that Flores doesn't run the same concepts 2 weeks in a row, that they've upped their man coverage. I think they played nothing but third down on third down last week. They played nothing but man. So they're doing a bunch of things to essentially make Ben Johnson work. They have no idea what Flores is going to run. I have no idea what he's going to run this next week, but he has essentially put everything down to where he can pull from what he needs. And so I think that, to me, the key here will be the Vikings defense getting a couple of stops, getting pressure on Goff. If they can do that, there's a pathway for them to win this.
I might.
Scott, who do you like in this game? We'll start with that.
I got you. I like the Vikings in this game. I think that they're a team that's peaking in the right place. I think the losses on the defense are going to eventually catch up with the Lions, and I think this might be the week that it happens.
Yeah, Cody, I'm going to take the opposite point of view, and that point of view is anchored in. So the last statement you made when you were talking about the matchup is it's going to come down to whether or not they can get pressure on Goff.
Mm-hmm.
I feel the same if you flip it over to the other side of the ball. And what I mean by that is the Vikings offense with those two receivers is borderline unstoppable when you give Sam Darnold time. And the one thing I don't quite know why, but the one thing that the Packers could not do it at all in that game last week is put any pressure on Sam Darnold. And if you let him sit back there and you've got Justin Jefferson and you've got Jordan Addison and you give him a bunch of time, he's gonna pick you apart. And so to me, the question is whether or not Detroit can manufacture some pressure. And I think that's the one thing that that they can do, and you're probably going to see them do, is take some chances with blitzes and see if they can speed Darnold up, because Darnold has been really good this year. Darnold is, in my mind at least, is susceptible to pressure. And so the question for the only chance Detroit's defense has to slow down Minnesota is to put a little pressure on Darnold. Everything about this matchup would tell you that to your point, would tell you that the Vikings have the edge because they are more balanced offense and defense. Sasha, I like the Lions, and the only reason I like the Lions is because they're playing at home, and I think I think it matters. It's a little bit similar to the Chiefs. I think them having a week off and having home field advantage matters a lot. And so I think this is a culture win for the Lions. I think this is a team that's been building to being the best team in the NFC for 2 years. They have a bunch of injuries on defense, yes, but they can overcome that for one game at home to be the division rival, is the way I see it.
Yeah, I mean, they've been trying to be the bullies on the block all season long, and they have been the bullies on the block, and that's what they wanted. But if they lose this game, it's not all for naught, but it kind of all goes by the wayside. They end up with the 5 seed. They end up going on the road.
Totally.
And so, yeah, I think the Lions will be up for the game. But to Cody's point, the Vikings are a more balanced team, and They just don't have all the attrition on defense. So I guess that's why Vegas has it pegged as a 2 or 3 point spread right now. They're expecting it really close. That 2 or 3 points goes to the Lions because they're at home. But it'll be a great Sunday night game to close out the season.
I mean, the NFL does it again. One of the best games of the year on the last Sunday night of the season.
Yep.
Well, they kind of set it up that way though. Like they have every game. They don't set times for the last week until like right at the end. So they know they're going to put the best game on Sunday night.
Yeah, but unless you wanted to get into conspiracy theories, if the Vikings had lost to the Packers last week, they really wouldn't have had an interesting game to put on Sunday night.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. Speaking of other games, Saturday, Cincinnati at Pittsburgh. Cincinnati's been on kind of a heater, a big run to try to stay alive for the playoffs. I believe they were 4-8, and now they're 8-8. So does Cincinnati get one more big win to force the Broncos' hand on Saturday against Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I just think this is, again, we're looking at, I think the Steelers are, what was it, a couple years ago, Vikings, where they have all these wins, they look really good, and then they're going to get into playoffs and they end up losing to the Giants, at home.
Steelers are
right?
every year Steelers, right? Like they've had a lot of starts like this. Like the last year Ben Roethlisberger was the starter, they were like 11-0, and then went downhill after that and got smoked by the Chiefs in the first game of the playoffs. Like they look like themselves.
Right. And I just think the Bengals have cleaned up some things on defense. I still don't think that they have a very good defense, but they've cleaned up some things. I think the way that the Pittsburgh Steelers play offense, the Bengals can play some kind of man coverage outside. They can do some different things outside, which that's where everything is being funneled for the Steelers. I think the only way the Steelers win is if Najee Harris goes off and has like 200 yards rushing and they're able to just control the entire game. They force the Bengals to get into a bunch of single high where then they can then go and play the hero ball that we know that Wilson can play. Otherwise, I think that the Bengals win, and then I think the Steelers are washed in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I feel like this is gonna make me sound stupid and not analytically inclined, but I will do the same thing, which is I'm gonna take the opposite side in this game, and only because I don't trust the Bengals and I think the Steelers are better coached. And like, if I don't, Cody, I know you were watching it because they were playing the Broncos, but I might have had a little Chargers, Rams, Bengals money line parlay last Saturday, which means I needed the Bengals to win. And for 3.5 quarters of that game, all I could think is Zach Taylor is the biggest dumbass I've ever seen. like the Bengals tried to lose that game 10 different ways.
They did.
Quite frankly, like the way that Taylor manages that team is borderline incompetent. So, like, I think the Bengals are a better team. I think they have more to play for. I also just feel like Mike Tomlin and the Steelers coming off 3 losses in 10 days with extra rest and needing to build some momentum for the playoffs. I don't know. I think give me Pittsburgh plus 1.5 at home.
Okay. I think the Bengals are going to win the game. If they don't, then the Dolphins win. The bottom line is the Broncos are going to have to win their game to make it happen. They're 10.5-point favorites with the Chiefs not playing Mahomes, but this is the 3rd straight game that the Broncos are winning in. Does that start to weigh on you a little bit when you didn't get it done a couple of times and now you've got one chance left?
There is an opportunity for them to press against a Chiefs team that's essentially going to be, a bunch of practice squad guys. I do think that there is a little bit of that. I think Sean Payton's a good enough coach to get it done. Hey, look, we should win this game. It's at home. Let's win. Let's get in. Let's reset for the playoffs. But it does scare me a little bit. I mean, it is the Chiefs. And I think that but I will say this, I think that the Broncos will be motivated. They should have won the game earlier in the year against the Chiefs. I think that they should be able to win. They're going to want to go out. But no, to your point, Sasha, that is 100%. You start, you're seeing a trend. And all of those games should have been winnable games, essentially, right? And especially against the Chargers, and then last week with the Bengals, you should have been able to win those games, and they just weren't able to.
Yeah, that's kind of the games that shape the AFC side. We already talked about the Lions and the Vikings on the NFC side. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but I'm assuming you both like Bucks and Falcons to both win, which means the Bucks get in, which would close out the NFC playoff picture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think the Bucks get in, and I think that's the fairest outcome in that division.
Yep.
So if all goes according to that form, you'll have in the AFC the Chiefs, Bills, Ravens, Texans as your division winners, seeded 1 through 4 that way, and then the Steelers, Chargers, Broncos, 5 through 7. That 5 through 7 could switch around a little bit depending on tiebreakers and who all wins those games. And then on the NFC side, you'll have the Lions, Eagles, Rams, Bucks as the division winners in that order, and then the Vikings and the Commanders and Packers are both playing for who becomes the 6 and who becomes the 7, but they have both clinched the playoff spots. So a little bit to be determined in Week 18, probably not as much as what the NFL would like. There's definitely a lot of teams not playing for much this week, but still some good games to watch. What do you guys say we close out the show with some picks?
Let's do it.
Scott, I'll let you go first this week.
Can you update the listeners on what happened last week and our records? Because I feel like, I wish you would have done worse, but I am catching you.
Scott, we'll just say this. I went 2-1 yet again. So I'm 26-16 on the year, basically uncatchable. Scott did, however, creep over 500 with a 3-0 over, Lions cover, Bengals, Broncos over, 21-20-1 now. Don't screw it up. You go 1-2 this week, and it's all right down the drain, Scott. Or maybe even 0-3. And Cody's in third place.
Yep.
Go ahead, Scott.
Okay.
But he did go 2-1 last week. So overall, good picks by all.
Yeah. The 2-1 did include us letting him take the Tua under, even though Tua didn't play, but we won't. Anyways.
Did Tua throw for more than 235.5 yards, Scott?
No, he did not.
Noted.
Okay. Week 18, notoriously hard. We spent an hour before this show trying to come up with 20 best bets, and it was hard. There's no telling what's going to happen here. There's no telling who's going to play. So we're going to try to stick with some things that we know. My first one, I got to go back to it. I'm going Garrett Wilson over. Not only does the model like the Jets matchup in the secondary against the Dolphins, Dolphins have a good run defense. They're gettable in the pass game. I think Aaron Rodgers starts, even if they have to go to Tyrod Taylor. I think the Jets come out and play hard in this game. A sneaky one, I'm not putting it as a pick, but a sneaky one is the Jets to win that game against the Dolphins. So I'm going to go Garrett Wilson over. I think it was like 58.5 yards. We talked about Chiefs Broncos. I think the Broncos win that game. 10.5 is way too much. And so give me the Chiefs to cover 10.5 against the Broncos.
I'm going to have to stop you right there for a second, Scott.
Yeah.
I got into the chat first and typed Chiefs cover before you joined it. So I think that's my pick.
I don't see it in the chat.
Well, you might not have been here yet when I typed it. You know what? It's fine.
Okay.
Why don't you just take the Lions cover? I know that's what you want anyways.
Nope, that's bullshit, but I'll allow it. So, okay. So let me let me go
before we got here.
For my second pick, I'll go Bengals Steelers over. I think there's going to be a lot of points. Bengals can't stop anyone. Chiefs scored 29 against the Steelers last week, so Steelers can't really stop anyone either. So I like Bengals Steelers to go over 48, which is a big number anyways, but I'm going to say 27-24 Steelers in that game. And then my third one, which now I have to pick on the fly. Why not? Give me Lions to cover 2.5 at game time. It's actually 3 right now. I'm guessing it goes to 2.5, but give me Lions.
Lions.
Give me Lions
Lion
to
point.
cover 2.75 against the Vikings on Sunday night.
All right. I'll go next. One of my picks is spoiled. I got the Chiefs cover. I think the Chiefs have been in this situation before where they didn't have anything to play for week 18 and Mahomes didn't play. They haven't played against as desperate a team as the Broncos in those situations, but they generally they'll be pretty vanilla, but they're still going to play hard. You can only sit so many guys in the NFL. Like Chris Jones won't play, Travis Kelce won't play, Mahomes won't play, McDuffie might not. But outside of that, you're still going to have the rest of your guys out there playing. Carson Wentz is playing to get signed by somebody for next year. I think they can keep it within 10.5. So obviously Scott agrees. So I'll go Chiefs to cover 10.5. For my prop pick, I'll go Jordan Love over. The number is pretty low. It's 225.5 against the Bears defense. The Packers still want to win this game. They don't want to play the Eagles in the first round. So they want to try to get the 6th seed over the Commanders. I'm not 100% sure. It looks like the Commanders have that tiebreaker. They do. But if the Commanders were to lose to the Cowboys, the Packers could move up to 6. So I'll go Jordan Love over 225.5 against the Bears defense. And I will go Ravens Browns under. Here's my logic on that. The number on that game is only 41.5. The Ravens are 18-point favorites with 103% chance to win.
How does that work? How does that work when you have over 100% chance?
Yeah, I don't know.
It means you have to win by more than 2 or it counts as a loss. But and here's my logic on this. I tried to convince everybody in that meeting Scott was talking about that the Browns could score 12 points, and nobody seemed to really agree with me. So if the Browns don't score 12 points, it's pretty easy to get to that under. 34-0 still covers the under. If it's a huge blowout, that game could go under. And Dorian Thompson-Robinson, what did you guys say? 1 touchdown to 10 interceptions in his career.
Yes.
So I'll go Browns-Ravens under in that Saturday game. The first one leading off the slate.
I like it a lot. I think that game.
I do too.
I think that game looks pretty similar to Christmas Day Ravens Texans, which was 31-2.
31-2.
If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I don't think the Browns will get it safe.
Thanks, Texans, for the great Christmas Day game.
Yes.
Cody, what do you got this week?
All right, I'm going to go. Prop bet is going to be Bo Nix over 217.5. I think they're not – look, run defense typically travels, even if you're not going to play a bunch of starters. I think that they're going to have to throw the ball to win. 217 is kind of a low number. I think he gets over 225 easy. I'm going to go over under. It's going to be Washington, Dallas. I think that's going to be over 44 points. I have a feeling that thing's going to be kind of like a 28-24, 31-28. I think that both offenses are going to be able to move the ball. Both defenses aren't going to be able to stop anybody. I'm going to stay in that game with the pick. I actually think Dallas covers the 4.5 versus the Commanders. They beat the Commanders earlier. I think they want this game. And I think that, I think that this is a very winnable game. Dallas has been playing very well. I think the defense has gotten figured out a little bit by Zimmer, and I think that's kind of the wild card in here. If the defense shows up against the Commanders, this could easily be a Dallas win.
I like it. Doubling up on the same game. That's
Sasha
special.
loves doing that. You guys are always making fun of my teaser strategy. If you like doubling up on the same game, Cody, you just take that over down 6 points, take Dallas to 10.5, and put your mortgage on it.
One payment, please, not the entire left due. One payment.
Just one. Just one payment.
All right. Cody's got Bo Nix over 217.5, Washington, Dallas over 44, Dallas plus 4.5. Scott's got Garrett Wilson over, Bengals, Steelers over, Lions cover. I've got the Chiefs to cover, Ravens, Browns under, and Jordan Love over. Any last words before week 18, before the regular season goes in the books, fellas?
Enjoy it.
I will. I'm fired up about Week 18. I'll just say we just made some picks. We talked about the playoffs a lot. Everyone thinks they can pick a perfect bracket. We might have a chance for people to do that coming into the playoffs. So, if you think you know a lot about what's going to happen in the playoffs, keep an eye out for what's coming with Field Vision because we might have something cooking for the playoffs. So, excited to hop on this next week.
I'm fired up for the playoffs, Scott. Happy 2025 to everyone. Check us out on X at FieldVisionMI, on Instagram, FieldVision Sports, and our blog, fieldvisionsports.com. Download the app. You're going to need it if what Scott just said comes to fruition. It's going to be a great time. Thanks for listening to the Matchup by Field Vision Sports. We'll see you next time.
Oh, and can we get school back in session? Because my kids need an ice bath.